I just bought my first house in a town close to where my parents live. It's a small house, really all I could afford, but it's mine, and I'm super happy about it. I worked a lot, but my job wasn't the best paying, so I'd also hustle as a house cleaner on the side to help with bills. I've cleaned houses for years in the town where my parents live because it's small and everyone kind of knows each other. My parents are getting older, and their friends are also older. Older folks sometimes don't have the energy or ability to keep their houses clean, so they call me. Mostly just tidying up. It's not a bad gig, usually just a few hours of dusting, grabbing the mail, doing laundry, that sort of thing. One day, I got an email from an out-of-state law firm that requested my services. They were preparing to sell a house that had been empty and needed it cleaned for selling purposes. Along with cleaning, I was to box and organize belongings in the house. No problem. Except that the house they were contacting me about was super creepy. About 10 years ago, the former owners of that house were in a car accident. The car had gone off the road and into the river that divided my new town with my parents' town. All 3 members of the family had passed away in that accident. I'll call them the Smith family. It was a couple and their teenage son. He had been driving at the time of the accident. There had been rumors about the family that the mother had wanted a divorce or something, but rumors are rumors. The house stood empty for about 2 years until the legal proceedings were done, and the owner, a sister of the deceased man, took possession of the property. She now wanted to sell the house, contents included. The thing is, for those 2 years, the house was left exactly as it had been left that day that the family died. Nothing had changed. There was a bike in the driveway that hadn't moved. The front yard was overgrown, except the grass. I guess a neighbor mowed it occasionally. You could still see the curtains in the windows, and in the daytime you could see the light from the back windows letting the daylight through. Literally, nothing had changed since that horrible day. My parents didn't know them, but their neighbors said they were generally nice people. As the boy had gotten older, he started getting into trouble, and that's when the rumors of the divorce were spreading. The whole community was shocked when the accident happened, though, and being a small town, it was talked about for months. Eventually, the talk changed from, "What a sad situation," to, "The police were called again." Apparently, neighbors reported seeing movement in the house on occasion, and one day the garage door was even open in the early morning hours. Each time the police were called, they'd search the house and find nothing. No signs of a break-in, nothing disturbed. The house came to be known as the Haunted Smith House. The law firm knew none of this, and I imagine the new owner didn't either. It was just local knowledge. Regardless, they needed it cleaned out and must have gotten my name as the local cleaning service. Man, I didn't want to do this job. At the time, I wasn't sure I believed in paranormal stuff, so it wasn't so much about the house's history, but more about the long hours I knew this job would take. But the firm's offer was generous, and my new house had a mortgage payment. I said yes, and the firm turned on the utilities and sent a locksmith to change the locks on the house. The locksmith would be there on a Friday, and I would have the keys that afternoon. I was ready to start cleaning on Saturday. Friday came, and the locksmith changed the front and back locks and dropped the keys off with the local sheriff. I picked them up that evening and also bought a ton of boxes from the hardware store for packing up the house. I drove by the house on my way back home and saw a light on inside the front hallway. I guess the locksmith must have left it on, I thought. I drove home thinking about that light. It bothered me, but of course the locksmith must have just forgotten to turn it off, right? I pushed it out of my head. I went for a walk, started laundry, and had dinner. Pretty soon I forgot about the house until I was getting ready for bed and went to set my phone alarm for the next morning. I had a missed call from a number I didn't recognize. There was a voicemail. I listened to the voicemail, and it sounded like a butt dial for a second. First it was quiet, then I heard what sounded like water running. I listened carefully for another second, then heard a crash before the phone disconnected. What the hell? That was weird. Must have been a wrong number. I put my phone down and got ready for bed. Tomorrow was going to be a long day. The next morning, I got my supplies together with the boxes and drove to the Smith house. I pulled up to the house and unloaded my cleaning supplies. I put the crisp key in the lock and turned it, pushing the door open. The first thing that hit me was the smell. The house had a musty, baked smell, like too many summers with no open windows. Every surface had a light dust, and there were footsteps and smudges in the dust all around the door. From the locksmith, I thought. Thinking again about the locksmith, I looked straight at the lamp in the entryway. The lamp was off. I know I had seen that light on when I drove by last night, and now it was turned off. Maybe the bulb burned out? I took a step towards the lamp and turned the switch. It came on. I stopped to think. I know I had seen that light on last night. I shook my head. I don't have time for this, I thought. I set my supplies down, turned around, and closed the front door. The house was silent. I took a deep breath and started looking around. It wasn't a big house, but it had plenty of belongings. There were family pictures on the wall, a little boy's school picture, a wedding portrait, a lifetime of memories from people whose lives ended horribly and suddenly. As I leaned in to look at the pictures on the wall, I heard a crash. Something hit the floor in the other room. I stopped, sucked in my breath, and turned to face the sound. Hello? Someone there? Silence. I walked towards the source of the sound. As I took a few steps towards the back of the house, I saw a shadow move across the light streaming into the hallway from the kitchen. I froze. Who's in the kitchen? Nobody had answered me, and there wasn't supposed to be anyone there. I turned around and left the house. I went to my car and called the police. They arrived about 10 minutes later and did a walkthrough of the house. Nothing. They found nothing out of the ordinary. Just my supplies in the front area, but no doors or windows looked disturbed. They said there had been some break-ins in the area, but if there had been an intruder in the house, they were gone now. As a precaution, they told me to turn the lights on when I left, and that way, when they patrolled, they could see the house better. After they left, I called my parents just to have a familiar voice on the phone. When I picked up my phone to call, I saw I had a voicemail. It was the same number as before, and when I hit play, I heard the same sounds as before, what sounded like running water, and then the click of the call ending. Ugh, I don't have time for prank calls, I thought to myself. I dialed my mom's number and was happy when she picked up. I told her what had happened in the house, and she said she'd come over and help me. I was relieved she wasn't busy and told her it would be great for her to come by. I hung up the phone and picked up my supplies. I walked towards the back of the house, past the kitchen on the left, and entered the living room. The living room was a large room and had a big sliding glass door leading out to the backyard. It was a beautiful day, so I reached for the curtains to pull them open. As I did, I heard with complete clarity the words, "Don't go," whispered directly into my right ear. I turned very slowly towards the right. As my head turned all the way around, I saw a shadow move out of sight in the hallway behind me. I stood silently waiting for some sound or some movement, but it never came. I was absolutely frozen in place. I wanted to run back towards the door, but that would mean going in the direction of that shadow. I stood quietly and waited a few more seconds and then walked to the far end of the living room where I could get a better view down the hallway. If there was somebody in the house, they would have gone into the kitchen or down into the basement. There was no second story in this house. My first thought was maybe the police had come back. But when I looked down the hallway towards the front door, there was nobody there. The house was quiet. I took the few steps past the kitchen towards the front door, opened it, and was relieved to be outside in the sunshine. I waited in my car until my mom arrived. Either I was losing my mind or there was something in that house that I couldn't see. My mom pulled up about half an hour later and we walked inside together. Now, my mom is a person that believes paranormal stuff may exist, ghosts, demons, that sort of thing, but she's pretty tough and certainly wasn't going to let anything mess with her daughter. As soon as she got there, she helped me bring in more cleaning supplies and started walking through the house. Somehow, when you're not alone in a creepy place, it just doesn't seem quite as creepy. I felt bolder just having her there, and I moved towards the kitchen to start the boxing up process. I had packed up a few boxes when I heard my mom call. I walked towards the back of the house, through the living room, and into what must have been the teenage boy's room. The TV was on, and she was standing there staring at it. She hadn't heard me enter the room, and I asked, "Why are you watching TV?" She said she wasn't. She said when she'd come into the room, it was already on. She thought I had turned it on earlier. I told her I hadn't, that I hadn't even gotten to this room yet. We stood staring at the TV in silence. She turned it off and swung open the closet door, but, of course, there was nobody there. "I don't know, maybe I bumped into it when I walked in," she said. We left the room together, and she closed the door behind us. "Let's just get to work," she said. We spent the next few hours boxing up the kitchen. As soon as everything was packed and moved out into the hallway against the wall, we planned on cleaning the kitchen and then moving on to the next room. But first, lunch. We had been working pretty quietly throughout the morning, both of us thinking about what we'd seen and what had happened that morning. I was also quiet because I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to be alert in case I heard something. Silly, maybe, but I was definitely on edge. At lunch, she told me she had been really uncomfortable all morning and didn't like being in that house. I agreed and told her I was considering calling the law office and telling them I'd changed my mind about the job. My mom shook her head. "You need the money, darling. We'll work on it together." As we drove back to the house after lunch, my phone rang again. Since I was driving, my mom answered. "Hello?" She listened for a second, and then held the phone out, looking at the number. "There's nobody there," she said. Sounded like water flowing, and then it hung up. "I've gotten that call now like 3 times from the same number. It's really weird. I should just block the number and be done with it," I told her. She looked at the phone, hit block, and handed it back to me. "There, it's done. Now you'll never hear from them again," she said, smiling. When we got back to the house, everything was quiet. We walked back towards the kitchen to start cleaning and saw one of the boxes that we'd packed was sitting on the floor, open. Nothing in it had been disturbed, but it was just sitting in the middle of the floor, open. I looked at my mom and said, "You didn't put that there, did you?" She shook her head slowly. We picked up the box, retaped it, and set it back in the hallway. We did a quick scan of the house just to make sure nobody was there. The scary truth was we knew we wouldn't find anybody there. We kept working until the sun went down, and the feeling in the house got heavier and heavier. Both my mom and I were getting more and more uncomfortable, like tense. I don't know if it was the house or the workload or the stress, but all we wanted to do was leave. With the living room packed and the kitchen cleaned, we called it a night. I turned the lights on in the house before we left, as the police had told me to do. She went home, and I drove to my house. I was so ready for a good night's sleep. We had agreed to meet the next morning early at the Smith house. I pulled into my driveway and looked at my new house. The front light was on like I always left it, and it looked so cozy and inviting. With keys in hand, I grabbed my bag and headed towards the door. I looked down at my keys to unlock the front door and realized that I have attached my car keys to the Smith house key and not my house key. Oh no, I thought. With a sinking feeling, I reached into my bag and couldn't feel my house keys. I dumped out my whole bag. No keys. I realized I had to drive back to the Smith house because there was nowhere else I would have left my keys. I had them when I left this morning because my door is locked. With all the day's drama, I must have just hooked the wrong set onto my car keys. I thought about calling my mom to ask her to meet me at the Smith house, but it was getting late and I couldn't ask her to come back out just to babysit me for a few seconds. I took a deep breath, got back into my car, and started back towards the Smith house. Just as I was getting out of my neighborhood, I heard my phone. I picked it up to see the same number that I thought my mom had blocked. I answered it, and again, all I heard was the sound of running water. I knew the call was about to hang up, but before it did, I heard laughter, and then it hung up. Why does this keep happening? I thought to myself. Some stupid kid has my number and keeps pranking me. I'm going to have to block their number when I get a chance. At the traffic light, I studied the number more closely, and for some reason, it was vaguely familiar. But I couldn't think about that then. I was too preoccupied with getting myself ready to go back into that house. I'll just run in and run out, I thought to myself. I pulled up to the house, and the first thing I noticed was that the house was dark. I was absolutely sure that I had turned on the lights before we left, and now they're off. As far as I knew, I was the only one with the key. I killed the engine and sat staring at that house. There was no movement, it was just dead. I couldn't stall any longer. I had to just go in and get my keys. As I walked towards the house, I could feel my heart beating faster. My palms were sweating and my eyes were scanning all around looking for movement. But there was none, just the quiet, dark house. I put the key in the lock and it turned. I opened the door and reached for the light switch. I turned the hallway light on and quickly looked at the boxes lining the wall. All the lights in the house were off aside from the one I had just turned on. Just find your keys, I thought to myself. I moved down the hallway towards the kitchen. I rounded the corner into the kitchen and turned the light on. Scanning the room, I saw my wallet by the sink. Oh wow, I didn't even realize I'd left that here. I walked over towards the counter and reached for my wallet. And as I did, I looked in the sink. The bottom of the sink, there was about an inch of standing water. That was definitely not there when we left, I thought to myself. At that moment, the handheld part of the old house phone on the wall dropped to the floor. I jumped and turned. The receiver was now on the floor with its long cord attached. It rocked a little as I stared at it. Everything inside my head told me to run out of that house, but I still had to find my keys. I gripped my wallet and took quick steps towards the kitchen door. I had to pass the phone. For some reason, I reached down to pick it back up. As I replaced it back on the wall, I looked at the number written on the phone. My breath caught in my throat as I realized the number on the phone was the same one that had been calling me. Oh my God, I thought to myself, what is going on here? Just as the words went through my mind, the sink turned on. I turned in horror, staring at the water running. I was stunned, and then for some reason felt like I had to turn it off. Maybe I just wanted things to stop, or some pre-programmed voice that nagged me not to leave it on. I took the few steps towards the sink and turned the water off. I got out of that kitchen. I walked quickly into the living room, but didn't see my keys. The room was still dark, but I wasn't thinking clearly anymore. I thought of calling my mom. Maybe she had the keys, and if she did, I could get the hell out of this house. Of course, this didn't make sense. All I had to do was go through the bedrooms to check and see if my keys were there. But I was in such a panic at this point, I wasn't thinking clearly. I reached into my pocket and realized I'd left my phone outside. My heart sank. Now I felt totally alone. I had to go look in the bedrooms. I started with the couple's bedroom. There was no overhead light, so I had to find the lamp by the bedroom door. The seconds it took to walk from that bedroom door through the darkness of that room to the lamp seemed to last forever. I scanned the room. No keys. I tried taking a deep breath, knowing I'd have to go into the boys' room, but I couldn't get enough air. I left the light on in this room and went into the hallway. His bedroom door was closed, just as we'd left it. As I crossed the hallway, I heard the TV in the room turn on. Oh, I don't want to go in there, but this is the last place where the keys could be. The door gave way as I turned the doorknob. There, on the floor in front of the TV, were my house keys. I scanned the room. I couldn't see much beyond the TV's blue light. I stepped into the room and reached for my keys. Got 'em. As I turned to leave, I heard a whisper in my ear, the same voice I had heard before. I want to drive your car too. Every inch of my skin was crawling when I heard that whisper. Whatever this was, it was evil. I bolted. I ran down the hallway past the kitchen. I could hear the water running again. I ran past the boxes and flung open the front door. I left it wide open as I ran straight to my car. I got in, slammed the door, put the keys in the ignition, and floored it out of there. I never wanted to go back in that house again. I decided I would take the loss and call the law firm in the morning. I'll tell them I won't be finishing that job. As I drove, I started to feel a little bit better, knowing I'd never have to go back there. I rolled the window down to get some fresh air. My breath was starting to get back to normal now. I reached for my phone to call my mom. I had to tell her what happened and warn her not to go back to that house in the morning. As I turned my phone over, I accidentally hit the answer button. The phone had been receiving a call. I instinctively put it to my ear and heard, "I told you not to leave." Then I heard the sound of water rushing, but this time it was getting louder and louder. It was the last sound I heard as my car hit the black river water. If you enjoyed that story, I'm glad you found me. I tell creepy stories about scary encounters and paranormal events. If this is your thing too, stay, listen, and subscribe to Lady Grimm for more stories. It's okay to keep the lights on. Let me tell you another story. I've been a pet sitter for about 10 years and have racked up a few crazy client stories, but none as bizarre as this one. I do contract work for a larger company that generates client leads. One of my regular clients, let's call her Sandy, has a cat and a dog, but often travels for work. I'm happy to sit for her. She's a very nice lady who loves her pets, and I've known her for a few years. She told me she'd be going on a trip, and the trip would last about 3 weeks, the longest one she'd taken with me as her pet sitter. She requested a mix of day visits, just for feeding and letting her dog out to use the bathroom. But she also requested some overnight visits since the kiddos were in a new house and her trip was going to be a long one. This meant I'd stay some nights and leave in the mornings. I was thrilled. As a pet sitter, it's much easier to work with clients you know rather than start fresh with new clients and new routines. So I was happy to work with her. The pets were nice and pretty well behaved. The only catch was that she just moved to a new house, so her pets were still settling in. Just before she went to the airport, she dropped off her key, and my first visit was planned for that same evening. When I arrived at the house, the porch light was on. I pulled into the driveway. It was a quiet neighborhood, but there was something about the street name that tickled the back of my brain. It was familiar somehow. I unlocked the door, and Marty, her little black dog, came running to greet me. Marty was a border collie mix of some sort, always very sweet, always affectionate, and very playful. He was a ball dog, meaning that he really enjoyed it when you threw the ball for him. He could play fetch for hours. He was really the main reason she hired a pet sitter. He had a lot of energy and needed someone to hang out with when she was gone. Her cat, Letty, was beautiful, all black with the most beautiful yellow eyes. They were remarkable. She looked like a perfect Halloween cat. She was a small cat, but like most cats, affection was given on her own terms, and she was generally a bit skittish. When I was there, she would stick around and rub herself around my legs affectionately, especially at mealtimes. My first visit was going to be an overnight, and I brought a backpack with a change of clothes. I dropped my bag by the front door and walked towards the back of the house to let Marty out. She had a fenced-in backyard here, but it was sparse. There was some dirt piled up on the side of the yard, and the grass was a bit overgrown. There was also a shed in the far corner, which looked old and run down. I noticed there was a heavy lock on it, too. As I walked towards the back of the house, I had scanned for Letty, but didn't see her. This was odd. Usually she would come out to see who was at the door. She's probably just doing cat stuff, I thought. I tossed the ball for Marty for a few minutes. He eventually got tired and came back to lay at my feet. "You ready to go back inside, buddy?" I asked. As I finished my sentence, his ears perked up and he stared at the back of the house. I turned to look at what he was looking at. There, in the window, was Letty. She was staring at me and Marty. After a second or two, Marty let out a low growl and stood behind me. "It's just Letty," I said. "Come on, let's go inside." I had his ball, so he followed me. He was panting, but I couldn't tell if it was from exercise or stress. Once inside, I got him a fresh bowl of water, and we sat down. Letty stayed on the windowsill, but continued to stare at us. I stood up, grabbed my backpack, and set it in the kitchen. Sandy's new house was an older house, but looked as though it had been freshly remodeled. It smelled of fresh paint, and everything felt clean. Even so, something about it made me uncomfortable, but I couldn't figure out what. Maybe it was the fact that Letty wouldn't stop staring at me. It was giving me the creeps. Everywhere I went, I could feel her eyes on me. "You're probably hungry," I figured. Sandy had left their food containers on the counter, and I filled their bowls. Marty ate straight away. His food was gone in a couple of minutes. Letty continued to sit on the windowsill, just staring at me. She'll eat when she's hungry, I thought. I sat on the couch watching TV, and Marty curled up next to me. After a couple of hours, I decided to head for bed. I found the guest room and settled in, playing games on my phone before I fell asleep. Marty was on the bed with me, and after a few minutes, he also settled in. Sometime before 3 a.m., I woke up to Marty standing over me, growling. This made me sit straight up in bed, and I turned on the light. He wasn't growling at me. He was growling over me, towards the door of the bedroom. As soon as I turned the lights on, I heard what sounded like footsteps leaving the bedroom door. Maybe that's Letty, I thought, in my half-asleep state. But why would Marty be growling, I thought. The idea that somebody was outside the bedroom door, somebody that wasn't Letty, crept into my mind. I got out of bed and went towards the door. Marty was right next to me, still growling. Now I was getting pretty freaked out. I put my head close to the door to see if I could hear anything, but the house was silent. I reached for the doorknob and opened the door just a crack. Given that opportunity, Marty pushed through the crack and ran down the hallway towards the living room. Oh man, I thought. I stepped out into the hallway and followed him towards the living room, turning on the lights as I went. When I got to the living room, I saw Marty standing there, still growling and barking at Letty. Letty was sitting in the front of the back door, just staring at Marty and then at me when I walked in. Her big green eyes were so bright. So it was Letty in the hallway, I thought, and then a second thought. Didn't she have yellow eyes? I called Marty to come to bed, and he came to me but growled back towards her. This was strange for them because they generally got along pretty well. Maybe it was just the new house. We went back to the guest bedroom. I shut the door and this time locked it, just in case. The next morning, I got up and filled Marty's food bowl. Letty's was untouched from last night. While Marty was eating, I heard scratching at the back door. I looked through the blinds and saw Letty. She was outside. How had she gotten outside? Sandy didn't mention any sort of a cat door. She had always kept Letty indoors. I opened the door and let Letty run in, right past her food bowl, and disappeared down the hallway. I sent a quick text to Sandy asking her if she had a cat door. I had to leave, but would be back later in the afternoon. When I came back to Sandy's house, I unlocked the door, came inside, and closed the door behind me. I heard muffled barking and followed the sound to a door off the kitchen. I opened the door, and Marty came blasting through, so excited to see me. I looked past him and realized this was the basement. "How did you get locked in the basement?" I asked Marty as though he would answer me. The poor dog was visibly stressed and super thirsty. I put water in his bowl and he drank all of it. Letty's food bowl was still untouched. What was going on with these two? I searched around for her, but she didn't come when I called her, and she was still acting really strange. I hadn't heard back from Sandy yet, so I went to the back door and stepped outside. Towards the back of the yard, I saw movement. There was a large dark shape in the corner of the yard by the old shed, a shape I could barely make out in the fading daylight. As I was watching it, the shape seemed to get smaller and disappeared into the shadows. A second later, a Letty came out of the tall grass towards me. I blinked a couple of times, thinking I was starting to lose my mind. Letty slowly passed me, staring the whole time, her electric green eyes piercing me. She walked through the open back door. I followed her in, and as I watched her go past Marty, who was still staring at his water bowl, he stepped backwards away from her and hid behind me. As I watched all of this happening, I felt the familiar buzz of my phone in my pocket. I reached down. It was a text from Sandy. It read, "No cat door. Why do you ask?" I explained to her that Letty was somehow getting out of the house, both while I was there and when I had left for the day. She asked me to check all the windows in the house and to be sure nothing was open. I told her I would. I walked through the house and checked each window. There were no open windows or doors. I even checked the creepy basement. It had a small window along the top of the wall, but even that window was closed and locked. I had no idea how she was getting out of the house, but I was glad she always wanted to come back inside. I texted Sandy that I would spend the night tonight, just to be sure she didn't get out again. Marty stayed close to me throughout the evening and wasn't his usual bouncy self. He seemed nervous and edgy. He sat with me on the couch for a little while until it was time for bed. I fed Marty a snack and emptied Letty's food bowl. I added new food for her. I hadn't seen her all evening. I brushed my teeth and got ready for bed in the hall bathroom. I turned out the light and headed towards the guest bedroom. Marty was right next to me, but suddenly started growling, a very low growl. I looked in the direction he was facing, and at the end of the hall towards the dark living room, there were two big green eyes staring down the hallway at us. This made me jump, and I said out loud, "Oh my God, Letty, you scared me." I laughed nervously, feeling silly, but When she didn't move, I pulled Marty away. "All right, buddy, let's go to bed." I watched her as I closed the bedroom door and locked it again. She was still sitting there, motionless. Seeing her like this was really creeping me out. She was acting so differently than she used to. I put it out of my mind and tried to settle in for bed. I had a hard time falling asleep. Marty kept twitching and moving around. He was also having a hard time settling. I was startled awake by loud barking. I was so tired I thought I was dreaming. I reached up for my phone and knocked it onto the floor. The sound made Marty stop barking for a second, and I could see past him in the direction he was barking. There was a giant black shadow in the corner of the bedroom. I could just make out what looked like the shape of a man, but a very tall man, like 7 feet tall. The figure was jet black, and the instant I saw it, it looked straight at me with bright green eyes. I screamed and pulled myself backwards against the headboard. Marty was barking even louder now, and as we watched, the black cloud just disappeared, like smoke dissipating right in front of us. Marty kept barking and ran towards the corner. I fumbled around on the floor for my phone and turned it on for some light. As I reached for the lamp, I heard Marty running after something that ran under the bed. My heart was pounding now, but I had to look under the bed. Marty kept barking at the foot of the bed. I turned on my phone flashlight and leaned down to see what was under there. 2 bright green eyes were staring back at me. It was Letty. "Oh my God, Letty, what are you doing in here?" I yelled. She hissed at me and went to the door to let her out. She ran past me. As Marty ran behind me, I locked her out of the bedroom. I sat on the bed with my heart racing. I thought about what I had just seen and decided to Google Sandy's new house address. The results made me sick. Sandy's new house, this house that I was staying in, was the former home of a convicted murderer. The guy had murdered his 2 brothers who also lived here, claiming a demon made him do it. He had hid the bodies in the shed in the backyard. He also had a habit of hurting animals. I read the articles online and my skin was absolutely crawling. I don't think I believed what I had seen in that room until that very moment. Was that Letty I was seeing, or something else? I left the lights on and didn't dare go back to sleep. I heard Letty, or whatever looked like Letty, walking up and down the hallway for the rest of the night. The sounds were much larger than a cat should make. When morning came, I didn't see Letty in the house. I went outside and checked the yard. I didn't see any sign of her. Just as I was heading back inside, I heard yowling coming from the shed. Was it a real cat? Could it be Letty, or was it that thing? My mind raced. I went towards the door of the shed. The big lock was open now, still hanging on the door. When and how did that get opened? I didn't want to open that door, but the closer I got, the more it sounded like a real cat. I pulled the lock off the door and opened the shed. Out sprang Letty, looking desperate, her beautiful yellow eyes staring at me as she circled my legs, meowing. "Oh, Letty, you poor thing, what happened?" I asked her. I looked back at the house and saw a large black cat with green eyes sitting in the guest room window staring at us. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I wasn't spending another moment there. I ran back into the house, grabbed Marty's leash and my backpack, and bolted with Letty in my arms towards the front of the house. As I turned to close the door behind me, I saw that thing, that cat demon, sitting in the living room. Just before I closed the door, I watched it growing larger and taking a much cloud-like black shape. I slammed the door and drove to my house with Letty and Marty. I called Sandy and told her everything. She was horrified and said she'd seen a black cat in the yard the day she'd toured the house the first time, but of course hadn't given it a second thought. She sounded terrified and said she didn't know what to do next. It's been 2 weeks, and Sandy flies home this week. Home, but to what?